Welcome to the Calm Analytics channel. Boris Dizenghausen is here with you. Today is June 4th, and there are a lot of interesting news stories. In this episode, beware Crimea is closing. And as for the Crimean Bridge, it seems it's not going to last much longer. Neither combat dolphins, no boom barriers, no grates have saved it, and they won't save it. A British colonel is warning about a possible nuclear strike, and sanctions against Russia are already at the starting line. Plus, Ukraine will receive 100,000 drones from Britain. This is the largest shipment in history. And Lukashenko has finally made it to Beijing, including to seek protection from Putin. This and more will be covered in today's episode. There's a lot of interesting stuff ahead. If this is your first time on this channel, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. Let's get into it. Let's start with the bridge. Peskov stated that the bridge was attacked, but there is no damage. Well, of course, we believe him. Peskov has never lied to us. So the last few days have shown that Ukraine is capable of delivering a very tough asymmetric response. Moreover, the planning and execution of these operations are at the highest level. As for the Crimean Bridge, let me remind you, it's one of the most heavily guarded sites, and yet somehow Ukrainian special services managed to deliver and detonate a ton of explosives at one of the bridge's supports. This is already the third attack, I remind you, since the start of the full-scale invasion. There was October 2022, there was July 2023, and now, of course, video footage has already appeared. The most interesting thing here is that the Ukrainian special services managed to obtain high-quality video, where you can clearly see that the explosion is quite powerful. And naturally, traffic on the bridge was temporarily suspended, but then resumed. First of all, the fact that this plan was successfully carried out at one of the most heavily guarded sites speaks to the very serious capabilities of our Ukrainian special services. So, what can we say about less well-guarded sites then? And how exactly the Ukrainian special services managed to get through the boom barriers, these grids, the combat dolphin cameras, combat penguins, and so on, is still not entirely clear. According to our side, the bridge is now in fact in an emergency condition. That is, this support pillar is significantly damaged. But there's another important point. We all understand who we're dealing with. In other words, the fact that the bridge has been reopened to traffic doesn't mean it's not in an emergency condition. Putin doesn't care if something happens to Russians on the bridge. What matters to him is not to show that he has suffered a very, very painful blow. For him, the Crimean Bridge is also a sacred structure, a symbol of the annexation, as he sees it, though in reality it's the annexation of Crimea, a concrete bond connecting mainland Russia. So in general, these are the different aspects. But let me just remind you, even if all the supports had been destroyed, he still would have let Russians drive across that bridge with their children just to avoid showing that he had been struck. He behaves exactly like the Soviet government. Remember, during the Chernobyl disaster, May 1st, 1986, everyone was sent to the demonstration in Kiev. So he acts in exactly the same way, as long as he doesn't have to admit, well, what if a bunch of people die later? Well, that's not a big deal, as long as the damn West doesn't find out that we've been hit or that a disaster has happened here. Let me remind you, back then on May 1st in Kiev, the radiation level in some areas was up to 50 times higher than normal. The wind was blowing directly from Chernobyl at that time. Meanwhile, by the time of the May Day demonstration, many party officials had already sent their families away, some as far south as possible, others to Moscow or even farther. So Putin is behaving in exactly the same way. Remember, Kursk, it sank. In other words, what mattered to him was that, God forbid, some Western intelligence agents wouldn't find out what was going on with the Kursk and why the submarine sank. As for the fact that there were submariners still alive, writing notes, knocking for several days, he didn't care about any of them. He didn't even interrupt his vacation in Sochi back then. So in reality, it was only after, 5 or 6 days that they even started the rescue operation. And when the Norwegians were finally allowed in, they opened the hatch in 17 or 18 minutes. So people could have been saved, but under no circumstances was that allowed. That's Putin in a nutshell. He avoids talking about disasters, avoids commenting on them. I mean, just how much of a cynical bastard do you have to be to sit in Sochi enjoying your vacation for several more days, while your submariners are dying a painful death? In general, Putin's rise to power was built on the bombings of his own people's homes. We talked about this in the last episode, the investigation into the Ryazan sugar, so I won't go back to that now. And 3 months later, the Kursk happened, 3 months after Putin's inauguration. So you could already tell by his attitude back then. At that time, it was still possible to conduct an investigation and find inconsistencies. And Zhirinovsky, remember, was shouting, "How did it happen that we were told about the explosion in the building in advance?" So all of that was already there. And about the Kursk, when Putin smiled and said, "It sank," a classic psychopath. Even then, it was possible to understand what kind of monster had been brought to power. But what can you do? Everyone, well, almost everyone, was satisfied. Those who weren't satisfied, well, those were later physically eliminated. You know what's amazing? I was born in Crimea, in Sevastopol. There has always been a kind of separate subspecies of Putin admirers there. I mean, they could argue themselves hoarse, with wild bulging eyes, insisting that Putin was right, wearing t-shirts with his image. If there were icons of Putin, they would kiss the icons. They would venerate his relics. Oh, and also on Nakimov Square in Sevastopol, well, for those who know, the most hardcore group of pensioners would always hang out there, and at the mention of the word Putin, they would practically go ultrasonic and fall into some kind of ecstasy. They would literally shake with happiness. So what did I want to say about this bridge? So even if there's been serious damage done there, of course, no one is going to tell the Russians about it. And secondly, it's clear that this bridge isn't going to last. Sooner or later, it's going to get smashed. As the horseman of the puppet apocalypse, Medvedev recently wrote, "Retribution is inevitable. Everything that is supposed to explode will be blown up, and those who are meant to be destroyed will disappear." He wrote everything correctly. It started with the bridge and with the long-range aviation airfields, with part of Russia's nuclear triad. Actually, do you know who Medvedev reminds me of? Villains from the Young Spectator's theater. Like, I'm an evil villain. Now I'm going to scare you all. And he's only scary to children under 5, and even that's questionable. I think even they aren't afraid of him. Obviously, the official reaction, everyone is just in shock, both the Telegram channels and the Z Patriots. How could this happen? It's just one thing after another. They're burning our unique planes. They're blowing up our bridge. What on earth is going on? But what amazes me most, of course, are those who stand for hours in multi-kilometer traffic jams on that bridge with their children. Putin has already ruined your coastline with oil sludge. The bridge itself could blow up at any moment, and yet you keep going there, into Crimea, which isn't even yours. Right. Naturally, all sorts of theories immediately started circulating about how Putin would retaliate. And so, retired British Colonel Richard Kemp analyzed the possibility of a nuclear strike. In other words, he considered that Putin might actually contemplate using tactical nuclear weapons in response to the terrible pain and humiliation inflicted on him by Ukrainian special services. So you can go on and on about how you've captured one village, then another, but these kinds of asymmetric operations by Ukraine completely nullify all those triumphant narratives. In other words, the whole world is buzzing right now about how impressive the security service of Ukraine has been in recent days. God's service, as we call it here. And at this point, it doesn't even matter how many unique Russian bomber aircraft have been destroyed. The fact itself is what counts. Ukrainian special services are everywhere and are capable of inflicting very painful and very unpleasant blows. The same goes for strikes on sacred targets, such as the Crimean Bridge. And likewise, the destruction of part of the Black Sea Fleet and its expulsion from Crimea is just as significant. In other words, every ship that is sent to the bottom is a personal, painful blow, starting with the flagship Moskva. Regarding strikes using tactical nuclear weapons, well, it's not just that I doubt it. It would be a personal death sentence for Putin. Even if he does use them, first of all, it won't change the outcome of the war. Secondly, well, what can he actually do? Who was it, Simonian, who said it? We'll nuke over Siberia and everyone's electronics will shut down. That's what they can do. That's why he hasn't used it before, even when things were really bad for him. When Russians were being driven out of Kherson with ammonia-soaked rags when... Oh, alert. Ballistics on Konotop. Well, sanctions. I mean, how many times have we already talked about this? Yes, now they're ready. Everyone's ready. The Senate is ready. Congress is ready. Everyone's ready except Donald Trump. Just recently, the Speaker of the House of Representatives, Mike Johnson, personally expressed his support for imposing these tough sanctions and stated the following: that many members of Congress want us to impose the harshest possible sanctions against Russia, and I support this. Yes, everyone supports it except Donald Trump. It's clear that Johnson's support increases the likelihood that the House of Representatives will consider and pass this bill. But Trump is holed up somewhere in his own shell. He's sitting and waiting. Several senators already, obviously Lindsey Graham himself, Blumenthal, Mike Johnson just mentioned him, John Thune, Joe Manchin, these are both Republicans and Democrats, already support it, but are waiting. Trump is sitting there brooding over some kind of egg. And after the sanctions are put in place, and if that somehow has an effect and Putin ends the war, of course, Trump will then claim credit for it. You know, he's like that tipsy relative at a wedding who goes around telling everyone that he organized everything and that nothing would have happened without him. Remember the story about the reconciliation between India and Pakistan? Trump claimed credit for that too, but then the Indian Ministry of Foreign Affairs denied it. He desperately wants a Nobel Prize. Recently, his former advisor, John Bolton, talked about this. He's obsessed, he just dreams about it day and night, about getting the Nobel Peace Prize. Obama has one, and in Donald Trump's opinion, he doesn't deserve it. But this is exactly where the key to dealing with him lies. In other words, you know, if you have to deal with him, then you need to understand his needs. You have to work with the committee that awards these prizes and say that if Trump pressures Putin, then let's definitely give him that Nobel Prize. He'll end up saving lives. Impose sanctions. Putin won't be able to fight for long. He'll end the war, and we'll definitely put in a good word for you to get the prize. We could even put up a gold-plated statue of you somewhere here in Kyiv. There won't be any problems. I guarantee you that after tough sanctions are imposed, Nabulina's only job will be to come to Putin in the morning and report how many days the Russian economy has left to live. But it's really astonishing, isn't it? Trump, who says, I don't want people to die, I don't want young people to perish, and so on. If you don't want that, impose sanctions. But it's astonishing. Right now, Putin is interested in dragging things out as much as possible, prolonging everything without a ceasefire. But if the clock starts ticking in the opposite direction and everything there becomes irreversible, the rods are already in motion, the sarcophagus is tearing apart the Russian economy, then of course he'll think 100 times before acting. The main thing is, whether he thinks about it or not, that's not important. With what will he fight? With what, exactly? Well, another one of Putin's buddies, Lukashenko, has finally been granted an audience in Beijing. He's been seeking this meeting for a long time, making requests for months, but they kept refusing him. And now he's finally been received in Beijing. There are a lot of questions piled up for him. I think even for Lukashenko himself, it's difficult to keep straddling the fence like this. On one hand, Putin is pressuring him, pushing, come on, create chaos at the border. On the other hand, China doesn't quite understand, and in response to this chaos at the Polish border, the issue of Chinese transit arises. In short, there are a lot of questions for Lukashenko. You see, his task now is simply not to get himself into serious trouble, that's all. So this is what his management has led to. He's been in charge for 30 years. And Lukashenko, he's not exactly a young sprout anymore, right? I mean, he looked really unwell in Beijing. After 30 years of his rule, the economy is on its last legs, cowsheds are falling apart, there's a potato shortage, the country is under sanctions, and instead of good neighborly relations, he's antagonizing all the neighbors. And it's not just him, no, he's being forced into it. Like, it's not me, it's Putin. But with Putin, well, that's his only achievement, he's ruined everything else. But at least he has Putin. At least there are 2 fake Iskander missiles and, well, a ring from Putin as a gift. And to be fair, there's also a pile of cash stashed away in Middle Eastern and African countries. But that's another matter. The United Kingdom will supply Ukraine with 100,000 drones, increasing drone deliveries to Ukraine tenfold, and by April 2026 they will have delivered 100,000. This follows from a statement by the British Ministry of Defence. And what was important? £350 million sterling. That's about $480 million. And it turns out that 3 categories will be supplied. Not only FPV drones, but also reconnaissance drones, as well as kamikaze and serious strike drones. So it works out to about £3,500 per drone, though obviously FPV drones are much, much cheaper. That's why there will be a wide variety of very, very fascinating and incredibly interesting drones readily available for all sorts of different purposes. I talk a lot with our developers and operators. I want to tell you without exaggeration that we have a large number of really impressive developments, and some of these projects already have funding. Overall, this field is developing very seriously for us. By the way, I wanted to let you know that the soldiers from one of the units we assisted, the very same unit we supported not long ago, have sent along their heartfelt thanks and deep appreciation. But I was just the one who received it. Of course, this gratitude is yours. Because they also sent a field patch. In other words, we are doing something really, really important together. And every time we complete a fundraiser, every time they tell me, like, you were just in time, you really helped us a lot. I am truly proud to have such amazing viewers. Thank you all so much. And by the way, let me remind you that we have just a little bit left to finish raising funds for the Freedom of Russia Legion. Drones, radios, communication equipment, and the blessed fire that rains down on the heads of Russians. So considering what's already been collected, there's about 60,000 left to raise. So I think if we push a bit today and tomorrow, we'll definitely reach the goal. The link to donate is in the comments. The link to donate is also in the description. There you'll also find the donation account number, and there's PayPal for everyone helping from abroad. A huge thank you to all of you. We see everyone and we're grateful to everyone. If you're not watching on my channel, here's a QR code. Scan it to go directly to the Legion's donation account and you can donate there. In short, this is important. Britain is basically betting on a completely different quality of warfare. And I'm not just talking about our war right now. A real drone coalition is being formed with Ukraine. Right now, the UK is informally leading this alliance. Latvia is coordinating the purchases. The US is also supplying certain types like the Switchblade, and the Netherlands, Germany, and Estonia are providing funding for development, factories, and so on. And Sweden is working on kamikaze drone development. So overall, it's a serious drone coalition. And for Ukraine, this means that the offensive strategy is being supported. Although judging by what our security service has demonstrated recently, what it's capable of, it's just absolutely awesome. Unfortunately, the Russians aren't standing still either. They're pouring a ton of money and resources into drone development, but together with the whole world, we'll win. I'm absolutely sure of that. And as for you, friends, take care of yourselves, take care of your loved ones, support the fundraiser if you can, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Wishing us all a peaceful day. And of course, glory to Ukraine.